They weren't just limited, they practically disappeared before anyone even knew they existed. Built in such tiny numbers, they became whispers of legend. These cars survived only in faded photos, museum vaults, or the hands of the luckiest collectors on Earth. Here are 3 of the rarest old cars of all time you've never seen. The 1938 Phantom Corsair is the sort of car that almost doesn't seem real when you see it for the first time, as though someone took a piece of tomorrow and quietly slipped it into the sepia-toned streets of pre-war America. In an age dominated by tall, upright sedans with chrome-laden grilles and bulbous fenders, the Corsair seemed to glide in from an entirely different dimension, low and impossibly sleek, with every contour shaped by a vision of speed and aerodynamic grace rather than the familiar language of classic automotive ornamentation. Its body, crafted largely from aluminum and steel, stretched impossibly wide and sat dramatically low to the ground. The front end was like nothing else on American roads in the late 1930s. Headlights almost hidden behind flush-fitting glass, no prominent grille to speak of, and a tapering nose that sliced the air rather than bulldozing through it. The wheels were fully enclosed by massive flowing fenders that merged into the body, eliminating visual clutter and emphasizing a seamless, sculptural form. The roofline curved in a single arc from the windshield to the rear, almost like the canopy of a fighter plane, giving the Corsair an otherworldly, aircraft-inspired presence that was simply decades ahead of its time. Inside, it was just as radical. Despite its sporting silhouette, the Phantom Corsair could seat 6, 4 across the front bench, including the driver, and 2 in the rear. The dashboard looked like something borrowed from an airplane cockpit, with an array of dials and switches laid out for the driver's command. Hidden compartments, push-button door openers, and a padded interior made the cabin feel futuristic, yet strangely welcoming. This wasn't a stripped-down racer. It was meant to be the ultimate grand tourer, where passengers could experience speed and luxury without compromise. Behind this singular creation stood Rust Hines, a young designer from the Heinz ketchup family whose imagination burned far brighter than conventional automotive sensibilities. Heinz envisioned the Corsair not as a mere show car, but as the first of a series of limited production, high-speed luxury vehicles that would usher in a new age of American motoring, where streamlining, engineering, and futuristic design came together in perfect harmony. The car was built by Bowman and Schwartz of Pasadena, famed coach builders whose craftsmanship turned Heinz's daring sketches into rolling reality. The car was displayed at auto shows, film premieres, and in the 1938 movie The Young and Hart, where it looked so modern it almost broke the illusion of the period setting. Yet just as interest was beginning to build, tragedy struck. In 1939, Rust Hines died in a car accident at just 25 years old. With his death, the Corsair's journey abruptly ended. No further cars were produced, and the grand plans for a revolutionary brand of streamlined luxury died with him. The single prototype, however, survived, first as a private curiosity, then later as a near mythic artifact glimpsed in museums and at concours events. Even today, when you stand before it, the Corsair still looks startlingly modern. Its enclosed wheels, hidden lights, and aerodynamic silhouette wouldn't seem entirely out of place among concept cars built half a century later. The Phantom Corsair endures as more than just a car. It's a frozen dream, a rolling echo of unfulfilled potential, and the restless spirit of a young designer who dared to ask, why couldn't cars look like tomorrow? It reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful, haunting creations are the ones that never got the chance to change the world. Yet in their silence, they speak louder than any production model ever could. The story of the 1967 Shelby Cobra 427 Super Snake isn't just the tale of a rare car, it's a living legend of American automotive history, a wild chapter scrawled in tire smoke, laughter, fear, and tragedy. It's a machine born from Carroll Shelby's relentless urge to ask, what if? Even when the answer bordered on madness. And more than half a century later, it still embodies the raw spirit of an era when horsepower was the measure of courage, and the road was little more than a proving ground for impossible dreams. To truly understand the Super Snake, you have to start with what it was built from, the already fearsome Shelby Cobra 427. In the mid-1960s, Carroll Shelby, a Texan with a racer's heart and a gambler's grin, took the elegant AC Ace Roadster from England and transformed it into something that looked barely controllable, because, in truth, it was. By shoving in Ford's monstrous 427 cubic inch big block V8, the Cobra became an icon. Impossibly light, shockingly powerful, and wickedly fast. It could outrun Ferraris and Corvettes alike, and it became the poster child of America's horsepower arms race. But to Shelby, even that was just the starting point. Enter the Super Snake, a creation born not from necessity, but from pure adrenaline-fueled curiosity. Shelby's team took two competition-spec 427 Cobras, cars already so raw they were borderline unmanageable on the street, and then bolted on twin Paxton superchargers. The result was a car that didn't so much accelerate as erupt, with a reputed 800 horsepower pushing barely 2,500 pounds of aluminum and steel. The Super Snake could spin its tires at almost any speed. It was ferocious, barely civilized, and completely without peer. There was no traction control, no sophisticated suspension geometry to tame its fury, just brute mechanical force strapped to a chassis and pointed at the horizon. Only two Super Snakes were ever made, and what happened next only deepened their legend. One went to Bill Cosby, a friend of Shelby's, who famously recounted the experience in his 1968 comedy album, 200 Miles Per Hour. Cosby described the terrifying realization that the car was capable of speeds far beyond human reason, and after a short white-knuckle drive, he promptly returned it, declaring it the car that tried to kill me. Cosby wasn't exaggerating. Even seasoned racers found the Super Snake terrifying on public roads. The second Super Snake met an even darker fate. It was sold to a private buyer who, in a tragic accident, lost control and drove the car off a cliff into the Pacific Ocean. Both man and machine were lost, the Cobra vanishing beneath the waves, a fittingly dramatic end for a car that seemed almost too wild to exist in the first place. That left just one surviving Super Snake, a single, factory-built, street-legal Cobra carrying the full weight of its incredible story. Today, this car isn't just a collectible. It's an artifact of the moment when American muscle reached its most unfiltered expression. Seeing it in person is like standing next to a living piece of folklore, something that feels too outrageous to be real. Even Carroll Shelby himself admitted in one of his rare understatements that the Super Snake was probably a mistake. But what a magnificent, unforgettable mistake it was. To look at the Super Snake is to see raw power made metal. The side pipes ready to bark and roar, the wide tires that once struggled to keep it on the road, and under the hood, that supercharged V8 waiting to unleash chaos. It's a car that doesn't ask to be driven. It dares you, and very few ever had the nerve to answer. Over half a century later, the Shelby Cobra 427 Super Snake remains a one-of-a-kind icon, the car that terrified a comedian, claimed the life of another owner, and left behind a single survivor as proof of what happens when ambition, engineering brilliance, and a bit of madness collide. It's proof that sometimes the most unforgettable creations aren't the ones designed to be safe or sensible, but the ones built just because someone wondered, what if we went even further? And for that, the Super Snake isn't just a car. It's the roaring, tire-smoking embodiment of an age when nothing seemed impossible. And sometimes, it almost was. The 1966 Ferrari 365P Berlinetta Speciale Tre Posti is the kind of car that doesn't simply belong to Ferrari's history. It seems to hover above it, like a footnote scribbled by an artist who dared to sketch a dream far outside the usual margins. Even among the world's most exclusive Ferraris, it stands alone, part design study, part sculpture,
part mechanical symphony, and entirely unlike anything built before or since. Its story is quiet, almost secretive, yet it represents a moment in time when the walls between road car and concept, between engineering and art, seem to dissolve completely. At first glance, what strikes you is the silhouette. Drawn by the brilliant hand of Aldobra Verone at Pininfarina, the 365P Tre Posti wears curves that could only have been shaped by the wind and the eye of a sculptor. The front flows forward in a gentle, impossibly low slope, wrapping around covered headlamps that give it a face as elegant as it is slightly alien. From the side, the proportions look almost impossibly pure. A glass canopy stretching nearly the entire length of the roofline, framed by graceful, almost delicate pillars, tapering rearward into the muscular haunches that house Ferrari's legendary V12 power. But what truly defines this car is the cockpit, the audacious idea that gave it its name, Tre Posti, or 3 seats. The driver sits dead center, flanked by 2 slightly recessed passenger seats to the rear and either side, as if the entire car was built around the experience of driving, and those invited to join were simply lucky enough to come along for the ride. The central seating position wasn't some marketing gimmick. It fundamentally altered the way you experience the car. Perfectly balanced, vision framed symmetrically by the pillars, and with the sensation of absolute command over the machine. Decades later, Gordon Murray would use this same layout in the McLaren F1, to universal acclaim. But Ferrari and Pininfarina quietly did it first, long before the world understood how radical it was. Inside, the 365P Tre Posti was a study in sophisticated restraint. Soft leather draped over minimalist surfaces, thin, elegant switchgear, and a panorama of glass that blurred the line between car and the landscape rushing past. There was no clutter, no compromise, only the essentials presented with the understatement of true luxury. The effect was something that felt at once like a grand touring and a race car prototype, a paradox that only Ferrari seemed able to reconcile. Beneath its sculpted aluminum body lay the mechanical heart of a thoroughbred, the Colombo-designed 4.4-liter V12, producing over 300 horsepower, a figure that in the mid-1960s placed it among the most powerful road-going Ferraris of its time. The engine bay itself was a work of art, all polished alloy and mechanical precision, a reminder that at Ferrari, beauty wasn't only skin deep. But perhaps the most fascinating chapter of this car's story is how few were built. Just 2. Each destined not for showrooms, but for close friends of Enzo Ferrari himself. They were never formally offered for sale. They were not part of any production plan. They were personal gifts, the product of a time when passion and artistry could override the cold logic of profit and scale. And because of that, for years they lived more as whispers than as facts, known only to a handful of collectors, historians, and the rare soul who caught a glimpse at an invitation-only event. Even today, seeing a 365P Tre Posti in person is an event measured not in price, but in heartbeats. There is a presence about it, the knowledge that you are standing before something born not from market research, but from pure, uncompromising vision. It doesn't look like a product. It looks like a question. What if driving could feel like flying? What if luxury could coexist with absolute mechanical purity? What if a Ferrari could break its own rules? The survival of these cars, and the fact that they remain drivable living machines rather than static museum pieces, keeps that vision alive. They remind us that sometimes the most important cars are not the ones that sold in great numbers or conquered racetracks, but the ones that dared to step away from the expected path entirely. They become not just rare, but irreplaceable. The 1966 Ferrari 365P Berlinetta Speciale Tre Posti is exactly that, a moment in time preserved in aluminum and glass, a dream that seems so modern it still feels unfinished, as if it were waiting for the world to catch up. And as long as that single, centered driver's seat remains, there will always be at least one person who truly understands why it was built. Not to be owned, but to be driven, to be remembered, and to quietly remind us what happens when design is guided not by fear, but by the boldest kind of imagination.